So, when I was in 5th grade, I received the same terrifying news that is still delivered to 5th graders today. It was time for the talk. And by the talk, we all know that means the puberty talk. And as if that wasn't bad enough, back in those days, they held it at night so your parents could attend with you. Now, this was before the internet and email, so I just took the flyer that was supposed to go home to my parents and destroyed it because I was absolutely mortified by this idea. And then I spent the evening hiding from my mom, like literally hiding from her in the closet. And I thought I was so sneaky because it worked. She never came to get me. I didn't have to go to the puberty talk. And the next morning I got to school, and I was very disappointed to find out that I was the only person in the whole class that hadn't attended. And I felt like strangely left out. And since the imminent fear of having to go do this thing was over, I approached my mom and said, why didn't we go to that puberty talk? And she said, honey, I think you're just a little too immature to handle it. And I gotta say that at the time I was so offended, but really my mom knew what was up. So fast forward 20 years, and my convoluted career path leads me into the classroom. And it actually lands me in the math classroom, which was very strange because I loathed math my whole life growing up. And what grade? Of course, 5th grade. And one of my other duties as assigned is to deliver the talk now to about 100 5th graders every year. And it made for delightful happy hour stories every time it came about, but none would compare to the talk of 2010. So, times had changed. Parents were no longer invited. It was no longer held at nighttime, but times hadn't really changed that much. We weren't talking about consent and gender identity and non-traditional family structures. It was very set formula, very simple. It was 3 days long. Separate those boys and girls. On day 1, we're going to tell you about girl parts. We're going to talk about boobs. We're going to talk about periods. And we're going to talk about deodorant. On day 2, we're going to talk about boy parts. We're going to talk about the penis. We're going to talk about wet dreams. And for God's sake, deodorant. And then on day 3, it was very strange. It was like a vague description of intercourse, but not really all the details. But then a lot of details about the ways that you could perish from a very long list of STDs. And then at the very end, the miracle of pregnancy. So it was during this day 3, I'm standing next to this huge flip chart that's much taller than me. It was made sometime in the early 80s, and it shows the stages of pregnancy. So it starts with like one single cell, and then it divides into this like bumpy basketball thing, like a blastocyte, and it keeps dividing and dividing, and finally there's a fetus. And then at the very bottom of the chart, there's like a line art of one thigh and a baby's head cresting for birth. And so, one thing that I need to stop and tell you before I go any further is that our school was called Valley View. And our school-wide quiet signal was a V. And so if we needed to get the kids quiet, whether you were a custodian, an administrator, a teacher, if you were in the hall, in the classroom, wherever you were, you would just raise your Valley View V and everyone would go silent. So I didn't have to use this day because the girls were dead quiet and they were just staring at this chart, pretty horrified. And I was pretty excited because I felt like, man, I just described the pregnancy and birth pretty well considering I'm the math teacher. And also, I've never even had a baby. And so the girls are just silent, but there's like one hand flapping in the back of the room, and I get a little bit nervous because I see it belongs to this girl, Catherine, who is redheaded and very spirited, and that's really my favorite kind of child. But I can just see from her flapping that this is not going to go well. So I call on her, I say, girls, any questions? And Catherine's like, I've got one. What is that? And she's pointing at the chart. And I'm pretty sure I know what she's pointing at. But I'm like, which part? I mean, there's a lot going on this chart. And she says, don't tell me that's a baby coming out of that lady's Valley View V. And I'm like, oh, no. And the girls are just losing it. And they're like, oh, my gosh, Valley View V. And we're like, no, girls. And like when this happens with fifth graders, I still teach fifth grade, so I can tell you, you cannot fuel, you can't react, you just have to meet them where they are. So I say, girls, our school's quiet signal is the Valley View V. It comes from our school name, Valley View, not Vagina. And they are like thinking that they've been inducted into this little secret society where they're going to find out the true meaning that we've been flashing to the adults all this time. And so it got very scandalous, but I put the end on it. And then one thing I forgot to mention is that this year was a very strange year because we ended up scheduling debacle and ended up having to do our sex ed classes the very last few days of school. And this is very bad because fifth graders get very strange at this time because they're kind of grief-stricken that they're leaving the nest. They've been walking around like the cool kids at the school, but suddenly they're like, oh my gosh, I'm leaving this place. And so they have like a lot of emotion in there. And then they're also just senioritis. And they also are in pre-puberty, so they're surging with hormones. So this was like the worst situation that could happen, but that's how it fell out, and we did it. But because of that, there were just special activities planned all over the place. So I squash the girls' conspiracy theories about the vagina, and then we go back into, this was not the best idea either, but we did what we had to do, an yearbook autograph signing party, where we mix all the girls and boys in this one huge classroom, and then we pump them full of sugar with like a chocolate fountain or something like that. I don't even remember what kind of sugar it was, but we pumped them full of sugar. And on a good year, you're worried about how many penises are going to be drawn in these yearbooks, because that's just what they do. But now that we've just had this scandalous talk with them, it's even more likely. So we're just hopeful, like hopefully there's no penises or at least no pins. We're going to make it. We're almost done. At this point, I look across the room at my coworker, Jeff, and he has just shown the boys the same dang flip chart. And the boys are like notoriously a little more emotive during the talk and, dare I say, a little more immature. So he, too, looks very war-torn, and we're just across the room kind of like, are we going to make it? I think we're going to make it. I'm not sure if we're going to make it. So over the announcements here, and I need to tell you this. Jeff was my coworker who had recently left his profession as an attorney because he wanted more money. He wanted more prestige. No, he wanted more meaning. And so he had just joined us from his much more high-powered job, and Jeff is like the nicest human being in the world. He's tall, he's lean, he also has red hair, and he talks very slow and deliberate, and he uses big words, and he's very mindful of everybody around him. And when I first started working with him, I had to train myself to slow down my brain to keep up with his deliberate, purposeful words. And I'll tell you that his words were always worth the wait. I adore him. So I look over at Jeff, and we're both just like, oh my gosh, when is this going to be over? And Terry, the office secretary, comes on the announcements, and she's like, fifth grade, we have a transportation change. And we're like, who, what, where? And she's like, fifth graders, and we can't hear anything. So we ring the quiet bell, nothing. We do the little clapping stuff that teachers do, nothing. And so Jeff, ever the protector of our team, and always thinking of others, stands up and screams with his deep, booming voice, fifth grade, I want to see your Valley View V's. And I'm like, no. And it's silent. It's like slow motion movie where I'm like, no, don't do it. And it's quiet, and so I'm like, oh, good. It went right past him, but the only reason it was quiet was because of the calm before the storm, because the girls went absolutely demonically, exorcist-style, feral animal. They were, like, rolling on the ground. Like, they were out of body. And so Jeff's looking at me like, what? And I'm like, oh, my gosh, I can't, what? And so, but they're still so loud that poor Terry's trying to give us the transportation change. And then Jeff says, 5th grade, put your Valley View V's in the air right now. And then it just got 1,000 times worse. So, for years to come, anytime we want to provoke that same horribly red-faced Jeff, all we had to do was give him the Valley View V, which was so fun. And he also, so after the kids have left, and he's like, "Oh my gosh, what just happened there?" And I was like, "I'm sorry, Jeff, but you just told everyone you wanted to see their vaginas. And then you told them to put their vaginas up in the air." And it was so horrifying, but so hilarious. And I think that that's what actually got us through those last final days of school. So those kids are now 23 years old. And I love the idea because we all tell our story about how did you learn about the birds and the bees and what kind of traumatic puberty talk did you have? And it delights me thoroughly to know that there are a bunch of girls out there in their early 20s probably still referring to things as the Valley View V.